and mistakes made.
My Lords, I'm not sure we've fully grasped the magnitude of our predicament. You can't place a complex modern economy into a cryogenic state and then just bring it out without damage. We spent maybe £400 billion, more according to some estimates, on the pandemic and the associated lockdowns. We paid people for the better part of 2 years to stay home, and we covered the difference by printing money. And that creates a debt that has to be settled. There is no escaping the reckoning. And when I say I don't think we've grasped it, I don't make this point in any partisan sense. I blame as much the then Prime Minister, who came to the dispatch box in another place and boasted of our massive fiscal firepower and preened himself on the fact that our furlough scheme was more generous than France or Germany or Ireland, just as much as I blame the Leader of the Opposition, who opposed every loosening of the lockdown and now complains about inflation as though it was some act of God. At the very beginning of this debate, I think it was Lord Newby who said there was no need to act precipitately. But, my Lords, when we find ourselves in a hole this deep, we have to act with urgency. And every aspect of the financial statement, with the exception of the energy subsidy, was an attempt to stimulate growth in a position wherein we have to stab at every button, we have to tug at every lever. The IR35 reforms, easier fracking, easier house building, the reforms of financial services, reforms of childcare, anything that brings prices down and stimulates economic growth. Now, of course, all of these things are unpopular, at least in the short term. Human beings are change averse. All the easy stuff has already been done. Actually, quite a lot of the hard stuff has already been done. But we need to judge policies not by the popularity of the policy when polled in isolation, but by the popularity of the outcome. Every privatisation was unpopular when it happened. Most of them remained unpopular afterwards, and yet people approved of the overall package because it led to rising living standards. I have to say this applies also to tax. I was very disappointed that with a majority of 71 in another place, the government was not able to push through a small simplification of our tax rates that would have probably been, at worst, fiscally neutral and more likely beneficial in a quite short period of time. And I just have to say, as an aside, a number of people, starting with Baroness Smith and ending with Lord Seeker, have spoken about trickle-down economics. And I just say, to my knowledge, no one has ever advocated the idea that you enrich the poor by giving the rich more money to spend on their Lamborghinis or their art collections. The phrase trickle-down was invented in the United States in the 1930s as a caricature of the policies supposedly pursued by the Coolidge administration. If you type trickle-down into Google, it will prompt you with debunked, false, Reagan. What you won't find is a single person ever advocating it. It is an absolute fantasy, a parody, a leftist parody of how Conservatives are supposed to think. What we were trying to do in the budget, and it's a very disappointing thing that we backed off at the first hint of the first crackle of musket fire, was to set the incentives so that the whole economy grows and so that we get more revenue in with lower rates, something that even the IFS thought was feasible at that level. And this is not a new idea. I just want to finish by agreeing with the fiscal analysis of Lord Bridges of Headley. The idea that bringing tax back to the pre-pandemic level is creating some kind of skeletal Randian state. There's this sort of libertarian attempt to end all government spending is utter fantasy. We would gladly settle for the tax rates that pertained in the Blair and Brown years. There'd be a huge improvement on where we are now. We have only two ways out of this mess. We can either try and grow our economy so that the share taken by the state shrinks in proportionate terms, or we can wait for an external correction either by the IMF or by the markets. My Lords, there is no third option.